Welcome, Badgerverse, to the Badger audiovisual podcast presentation hour. I'm here with my good friends Tritium and Cookies. Cookies, this is your first time on the BadgerCast. Actually, I don't know, maybe it's like your 1.5th time because we tried recording this last week and an audio glitch has us back in the studio today recording again. So welcome again. And what's going on?
Thank you. Yeah, happy to be here. Honestly, I like the 1.5 take because I feel like I got all the butterflies out. I know how it works now. Wetted my beak a little bit, and now I'm ready to rock and roll here.
Yeah, it's kind of like when the dog eats someone else's homework, right? That's the cat.
Exactly.
And we're also here with Tritium. Tritium, what's going on?
Not much, yeah. Had a nice weekend. It's Monday. Excited. Just keep on going.
Cookies, do you want to give us a quick intro on what you work on in Badger, and then Tritium, you can say hi and tell us what you're working on and thinking about these days.
Yeah. Hey, so I do a lot of backend Web 2, DevOps, Web 3, kind of like blended stuff for Badger. So I got my start back in July working full time. And before that was actually working with Tritium before he started full time on some community involvement projects and Discord bots. And then through that, got introduced to Dap, who is one of the founders of Badger, one of the technical leads, and he was looking for someone to help him manage the keeper bots that run all the harvests and smart contract like day-to-day functionalities, making sure that the interest is actually realized for Badger vaults and funds get moved around and such. So I took that over in July and have been helping out with our cloud infrastructure and like DevOps automation, some like Web 2 security practices and stuff since then. So currently what I'm working on, and then I've also been doing a little bit with the like Badger Boost rewards repos as well.
Awesome. And Tritium, what are you working on these days?
Oh, I kind of been, as you know, I've kind of done a little bit of everything everywhere. Right now, my primary focuses are a little bit on like helping the tech team continue to find and onboard people, but primarily really focusing on our influence strategy. So that's kind of about like Convex and FXS and other like influence ecosystems, right? And how we create the best system to kind of utilize that to create yields for Bitcoin and DeFi, and how we get that out to the market and make people understand it, and yeah, do cool stuff there. And then the other thing that I've been talking about for a very long time is governance and the next steps there. And so I'm hoping to really like next month really kick off and try to get that going again.
And that is a beautiful segue into what we are going to be talking about today. So we've been on the BadgerCast before talking about our plays in the Curve Wars convex voting ecosystem and how that plays into our flagship asset of ibBTC. And this is really kind of a complex multiplayer game that the strategies keep changing as new entrants come in or as changes happen in the market. So it's something that we keep coming back to, and we're still kind of trying to optimize the strategy for Badger in response to other moves that are happening in the market. So this is the latest kind of edition of talking through our thinking and how what the implications of that are for kind of different participants in the Badger ecosystem. So what do you say? Should we dive in?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. All right. So what I want to do today at the start is just kind of quickly get a survey of the different players here. So we've got kind of three buckets. We've got Badger, BTC holder or BTC holders / like depositors on Badger, and then we've also got Convex holders. And I don't know, Tritium, do you want to just get us started with an overview of these? I don't know. Why don't we start with Badger? Like, how would you characterize the goals of Badger in this game that we're playing?
Well, I think so. Okay, it's a good question. So from the very beginning, I think since before Badger had vaults, it was very clear that our mission was to bring yields to Bitcoin on DeFi. And I think those who have been with Badger for a long time know that we've done a reasonably good job of maintaining reasonable yields on Bitcoin and DeFi for the last year. That started with our airdrop and launched, and so we had like a lot of Badger that we were emitting, and people were really excited about digs. Badger token was super valuable. And so for a long time, we were able to really provide the best yields and good yields for Bitcoin and DeFi simply by emitting a governance token. But obviously over time, like we need to slow that down. We can emit less. And the initial pump kind of dried up. So like Badger wasn't worth $100 anymore or close to it. And so then we kind of started to say, well, like we need to find yields on Bitcoin and DeFi that like aren't just us handing out governance tokens. And so our first try, I think, real like solid attempt with that was the Yearn Vault. We partnered with them for a little while. We tried to do that, but in the end, it was kind of based on some strategies. The fees were too high, and the management wasn't good enough, and it never really worked out. Right, that whole like the holy grail of a 10% sustainable yield never really came to be. At around the same time, we got really involved with Convex was launching, and we kind of realized that there was an opportunity there. So we shifted focuses towards trying to like actually create the yields through our influence, right? So since Convex launched, we've been running what we call these partner first vaults. And what that means is that unlike other yield aggregators, we, instead of selling all of the tokens that we receive for more of the underlying, right, we sell up to 20% max, and then the other 80% we keep in their native form and put them in some sort of an auto compounding helper vault. So what that means in the Convex ecosystem is that if you stake, let's say, Bitcoin and ibBTC on Badger on Convex, right, you're earning Curve and CRV and CVX tokens. We put those in vaults that auto compound them and generate yields and just continue to make them grow and emit to you then these auto compounding tokens. So that's kind of where we're at now. I guess what was your question? Maybe I.
All right, let me talk you through this outline and tell me where I'm going wrong. So when I sit down and think of like the bullet points of what Badger is trying to get, right? We are a DAO that people can deposit their Bitcoin into our smart contracts and they earn yield. And what we want, and part of that yield is what I would call organic yield, which is this what you described, farming Curve and Convex and putting it in the vaults, right? And then there's the Badger token yields that go on top of that, right? And so what we're trying to do is gradually over time switch to more and more of the organic yield and less of the governance tokens as we distribute more and more Badger, and that kind of winds down, right? Then on top of that, when we're performing the service through our contracts, we're taking a fee. It's usually like a 20% performance fee of farm tokens. So that's going to the treasury, which we would like to continue to pay our salaries and create new wonderful products for DeFi users. Then we've got Convex that we need in order to kind of produce these yields, right? Because we need Convex to vote for the yields on our pools in Curve, which is where a lot of the yield comes from. And then finally, we have like this asset ibBTC, which is like the Badger flavor of tokenized Bitcoin, and we want that to grow and become a more dominant form of Bitcoin in the ecosystem.
Yeah, insofar as it creates better yields for Bitcoin on DeFi, right? And I think that's the challenge. But yeah, that sounds like a pretty good layout of things. The one thing I would say is that we don't like right now. All of our fees get recycled into the system, right? So we're not paying ourselves or doing cool stuff based on our fees. Like all of our fees are being used to continue to create yields in Bitcoin and DeFi. Yeah.
Right. I guess that would be the one thing I would add would be like when you ask what does Badger want? Badger wants to deliver yields on BeFi, but like Badger also wants to make money so that people who are members of the Badger DAO have like their accruing value as like a part of our community, a part of our Bitcoin community. And not only are they accruing value where like, yes, we're able to pay contributors or invest in things or whatever, but we're also able to sustain or grow or explore new yield opportunities for Bitcoin and DeFi. And I think one of the things Tritium said that I was interested in, I hadn't really thought of before, she was like our first foray into, actually creating sustainable yield on Bitcoin was the Yearn Vault. And I would almost argue that I think Badger's first unique opportunity for trying to like create its own yield on Bitcoin would have been Dig, which is an interesting like concept because I think that was like also we had the initial component of like synthetic something in Bitcoin is going to be big. And Dig was the first attempt at it. And then I think we realized that the algorithmic coins, synthetic coins, weren't like the market didn't react to those the way that I think we initially thought they would. And so then the next evolution of that was ibBTC. And the unique thing about ibBTC is that it's a tokenized version of Bitcoin on DeFi that increases in ratio to Bitcoin over time, or has the capability to do that. It's not currently doing that because of a technical design or limitations in the current implementation of it, but it has the ability to do that. And I think that that provides a unique opportunity where Badger can provide underlying yield to Bitcoin and DeFi, and also controls a lot of the like fee collection or influence resulting from that. So like as ibBTC collects interest, Badger is the only player in that field that's like collecting the fees on the underlying interest of ibBTC, which I think is an interesting lever that answers the like, what is Badger trying to do, which is, you know, deliver yield and also be able to continue to support yield and make money off of it.
Yeah, let me move on a little more. But I just to point that out, I think there's a really interesting point here that I think is like key to everything that we're thinking about, right? Is that when Badger was a young DAO, when any DAO is a young DAO, right? You're creating these tokens and they have value, right? So like Badger had value, we were able to emit Badger, lots of it, right? Which was worth way more than the fees, and we had good yields on Bitcoin and DeFi, right? Then we launched Dig. Yeah, Dig was a rebasing token, but like even if Dig had or continued to be working, right, you can only like mint so much of a rebasing token to emit to somebody that's like not part of that system, right, before you start to like inflate it and erode the value, right? So it really is, you know, like as we've grown, it's kind of like we actually need to like find, you know, we need to stop acting like a young DAO and start kind of trying to figure out ways to be like a big whale, right? That can do things that only like a really big whale could do, and kind of move more towards being like the community's Bitcoin whale as opposed to yeah, like something that's emitting a whole bunch of gov tokens. And I think that's kind of really what this podcast and like what the next or the last 3 months and even more so the next 3 months of like Badger is about.
So let me get this straight. Are you calling us old?
Yeah, I mean, in DeFi terms, we're like what? We're like middle age, I think, right?
I definitely think so. I mean, we can vote and we can probably have a drink at the bar in terms of DeFi DAOs.
I think more. Like I think like we're approaching a midlife crisis.
I don't feel old, just for the record. I feel like I feel like I'm 2 months old. I feel
well,
like
you
we're
just
2
started
months
2
old.
months ago, so.
Okay. All right. So let's move on. So by the end of this podcast, I want to get us really clear on two ideas. Number one, this concept cookies that you alluded to about the exclusive yield for ibBTC and how that is so important here. And that's a concept that I think by the end of recording our last podcast, I was clear on. But since the weekend, the market gyrations, I think my mind has been erased again. So we need to get clear on that again, because I think it makes sense to explain that multiple times in multiple ways, because it's kind of complicated. And then number two, what's going on with the CVX strategy, right? And how that plays into it, because that is the voting power that creates these yields. And we've got CVX that's unlocked, and we want people to relock it. And so we want to talk about some changes that we've made to make it kind of more attractive to put your CVX in Badger. So, but before we go on to that, I want to just talk again about like this. So we've got the three groups. We talked about Badger. We talked about how we're getting what is it, midlife crisis. So like BTC, let's talk. So the second group is BTC depositors, and the third group is the convex people. So let's talk about BTC people. So, you know, they're putting some Bitcoin in Badger. They're either like small depositors. We've got some bigger whales in the Badger ecosystem. So I don't know, Tritium, how do you kind of think about slicing up the Bitcoin users who are in Badger? How do you have like categories that you put them in your mind when you're looking at the data?
Yeah, kind of. So if you look at the screen here, I've got this chart up, right? So this is a chart. It's not perfect, but it's basically of all of our different set deposits over since the middle of October, and kind of like up until November 2nd, right? Like I didn't realize the power of the giga whale, right? It was kind of like, okay, we've got 30,000 holders. and some of them are whales, and there's like maybe a few like pretty big whales, right? We knew that we had like a few VCs that had come in through that VC round and that potentially had some Bitcoin in the system. But then on November 2nd, like if you're looking at the screen, you'll see it, this happened, right? But we had like a few thousand Bitcoin, like kind of just like withdrawn and redeposited and like in a kind of, yeah, like strange ways. And it was like, what's going on, right? And it became like very clear that like that was all one holder basically that had probably half of Badger's AUM. So we kind of started thinking about like, well, wait, like, okay, there's the shrimp, there's, or the small Badger holders, right? There's definitely these whales, right? But actually a lot of our AUM is these like giant giga whales. And so then, like over the last few months, I've been talking to people a lot and starting to understand those profiles. And the way I see it, like, these smaller holders, so let's start with them. I tend to call them the loyal Badgers, right? Most of them have been with the protocol for quite a while. They've had, anywhere between like zero point 0.1 and maybe like 5 to 10 Bitcoin invested. They're super engaged in our community. They're there through and through, right? Like they're just in it with us. And one of the interesting things about like the long-term loyal Badgers is that, in the last 6 months at least, I think this is still true. It was certainly true on Friday. Like CVX and CRV have both outperformed Bitcoin. So the holders that chose to, or that chose to hold the Badger hold position, where you just really hold everything we give you, right? I think they've done very well on their investments, much better than a pure Bitcoin investment, and so that has increased kind of their loyalty. And a lot of that was like CVX going up. So at the same time, they were like, wow, I'm making money. This makes sense to me. I understand the Badger narrative. This is a good investment. I'm going to buy more CVX and put it in Badger. So that's kind of one example, right? The second example that I've become much more aware of, like since we launched ibBTC, is what I call kind of the rent seekers, right? So these are, most of them I think are a little bit larger holders, where like the gas isn't a super big deal, but I think some of them might be small too, right? And these are like the people that are just on convicts. They've got Bitcoin. They're going through, they're saying like, where am I going to get the highest yield? Do I think it's safe? How long do I think it's going to last? They're making, a pure kind of, what's the percent right now? How much money am I going to make decision? And they're selecting that. And so I think that's another, particularly in the Bitcoin space. Bitcoin holders are very much aligned with Bitcoin, and maybe not so much with like the protocols on Ethereum that they're farming Bitcoin on. And so to a certain extent, like they're just looking for returns. And then again, the third one, let's go back to, is the giga whale, right? And so the problem for a giga whale, as I've come to understand it, is that like you can't deposit 1,000 Bitcoin anywhere without like totally changing the yield structure, right? So you see 10% yields somewhere, 15% yields. You say, yeah, that's sweet. You go and you deposit 1,000 Bitcoin, right? And then the yields are like 2%. And then you're like, okay, like these yields suck. I'm going to pull it out. And then the moment you pull out, like the yields are 15% again. So the challenge that like real giga whales have, and I think most of these tend to be institutions, right? They're generally not an individual holder, but an institution that's trying to help a bunch of people make money on their Bitcoin in a more centralized manner, right? They don't really they need a way to be able to like scale the yields with their deposits, which at least up until Badger started playing with influence, right, was kind of not possible or very, very difficult. So yeah, I kind of think those are the three basic Badgers, right? We've got the loyal Badgers that are just into the protocol. They're in what they're doing. They understand what we're doing. They're along with us. They want to be part of the community whale, right? We've got the rent seekers that like if the community whale is doing better than they're doing or can get better returns, then they'll use it. And then we've got the giga whales who kind of see this as a way to like manage a DeFi strategy for them so that they don't have to think about it, right? But be able to get like potentially like semi-decent returns or hopefully better returns so that then they can serve their customers that are maybe more like centralized.
So to go back to like the kind of giga whales, you said that they may not necessarily be as interested in like the DeFi ecosystem. Does that include like the whole Badger boost mechanic that we've been rolling out, like that's kind of more for the smaller depositors,
I
right?
mean, that boost is a challenging thing, right? Because I think right now, I don't even know what Badger's market cap is. Do we still have at least 100 million? But if you think about it, let's say Badger has 150 million market cap, which is liberal at this point, right? If I'm going to go put, we've got $1 billion in AUM. So if I'm going to go put like a few hundred million of Bitcoin in Badger, right? And I need a 50-50 stake ratio to get max boost, like there's no way that I can buy enough Badger to get the boost, right? And without just, like running the price up so high that I'm going to totally wreck myself. So I do think like one of the challenges has been is that when yields were higher and when there was less boost, it was always the case that the Badger emissions that we were paying out, or the Badger and Dig emissions, like made up for the performance fees, right? But over time, as we've emitted less and less, there's now this 20% fee, and the Badger emissions like don't necessarily make up for it anymore unless you have a reasonably high boost, which I think for somebody that has more than like certainly a few hundred Bitcoin is pretty unachievable.
I'd also even say, even if you did have 1,000 Bitcoin and you were trying to achieve max boost, the max boost number you would dilute that by a lot, because we're only emitting what, like 10,000 Badger a week or every 2 weeks to like the ibBTC
No, I
set,
think like
which I think
20
is
or 30,000, a lot. But
okay.
yeah,
But like
you're
still,
right.
like I mean, if you
You're right.
have
Then you just bomb it for everyone, right? Then you
right,
bring
yeah.
the Badger yields down to like, I think it would still, I don't know, it might make up more than the 20%. I haven't done the math.
No, I think it's not like it would do nothing, but the site would look drastically different if Giga Whale had a 2,000x Badger boost.
Yeah, but then
than
Badger would be
yours.
worth like a lot
Yeah,
more too, right?
right.
So,
Yeah. So then, no,
so it might work out.
it might work out. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and this is kind of something I had trouble grasping, but why kind of Curve and Convex are so important, because these are tokens that have just a huge stream of emissions, and they're basically like, Curve is what, number 86 top crypto now, and they're putting out like $1 million of Curve a day or something like that, right? So like it's one of the very few protocols that's capable, just the stream of yield that they're paying out every day, one of the few places that's like really capable of producing an industrial sized yield for these big whales.
Yeah, I mean, let's just look at it here, right? Like you can go over to this Vodium website. And so what they have is that this round, right, one convex vote will generate 50 cents in yields over the next 2 weeks for the pool that it's voting on. That was like 2 or 3 times that last week, right? But yeah, everything's hopefully going to go back to normal, I guess. But yeah, the point is, so even now, one convex, one vote, right, for which there's 26 of them a year, each time that's generating 50 cents. I guess right now, right, that's about what, $13 a year per convex that you're generating in yields on convex for some set.
That's the amount that one bribe is paying one vote of convex, right? What you have pulled up right now.
No, I think, is it? Maybe I'm looking at the wrong number. You know what? Hang on. I've got this sheet. Let's just pretend it's last week.
Yeah.
Because then I can then it all works. So here, there's some math here about Llama Air Force, right? This is again from last week, but last week, $1 spent in bribes result in $2.52 in emissions being generated. So yeah, it equates in 146 in emissions. Sorry.
Okay, so what I'm just trying to get at is that the scale, like the reason that the Curve and Convex ecosystem is so important is because the scale of their emissions is material from a whale point of view, right? It's not like going to some protocol in Phantom that's got a market cap of like 10 million or 50 million or something, right?
Correct. I mean, another way to think about it is that I think there's about 25 to 30 million CVX that vote every 2 weeks, right? So if you take, I don't know, like 30 million times 1.5, you have like $45 million every 2 weeks in emissions that are being directed as of last week, right? Oh no, as of last week, it was like more.
Okay, cool. So we've covered the kind of Bitcoin category, and now we are talking about this yield producing game, right? So we've talked about the importance of Curve because they're so big and they have this emission stream. Convex is important because they have amassed a majority voting power in Curve, and the way Curve emissions are determined is that voters in Curve and by extension Convex vote on where these yields are going, right? So the long story short is the CVX Convex token has become like this predominant yield influence token is what we're calling it now, right? So why Tritium or Cookies, do you want to just quickly like why we have this CVX vault? How did we start it? How's it gone so far? And bring us up to speed on like where we are in this vault to kind of incentivize people to deposit their CVX with Badger and the results that has brought in so far.
Sure. So we set up originally this bveCVX vault, right? Again, from the very beginning, we were farming convex. In the beginning, you could stake it, and so it was bCVX, and then you needed to lock it to vote, and so we created this locking vault that basically allows you to put convex tokens in and vote for it, right? At the very beginning, I think there was no Vodium, right? So at the very beginning, like no, Vodium was pretty early, actually. I take that back. Like, at least before we were, I think Vodium was there before bveCVX. But the idea was, okay, you put it in, we're going to pay you a bunch of extra Badger for having your tokens here, right? Because then we can go and generate emissions. And we also decided that we would pay those Badger emissions out flat so that somebody that wanted to accumulate Badger in order to get boost could put CVX in, could get a bunch of flat Badger, and then slowly build up their boost, right? Fundamentally, the way Convex works is there's a 16-week locking period, which is nice, right? Because unlike the like 4-year locking periods of Curve, it does allow like semi-liquidity. And so basically what happens is you put tokens into bveCVX, it locks them once a week on like Wednesday afternoon Eastern, Wednesday night in Europe. And then they're locked. And then basically 16 weeks later, the first of which was like last week, right? We then unlock the tokens that were available from 16 weeks ago. They are then available to withdraw, and then we'll lock them again at the end of the week. So if you look down here at this bveCVX deposits and locking graph, you'll see like on the 21st of January, right? This yellow line is how much is locked. So this is the unlock that happened, right? That then freed up about 70,000 convex to withdraw. And over the weekend, when people were trying to get out of the market, right? That was all withdrawn. Now, this week on Thursday or Friday, I think there's about 300,000 unlocking. Here's our schedule. So basically now, like we just did this 70,000. Next week, we've got the 300,000. The next week, we've got the 500,000. And each week, those tokens unlock and become available for a week for people to withdraw. People can also deposit. And then at the end of the week, they get locked again. Thinking about the holders, right? At least when we thought about bveCVX, it presents two maybe potential benefits to users, right? Like one is that the liquidity profile is a little bit different. So like with BVEs or with CVX, you lock it, you then can unlock it 16 weeks later, and that's that, right? With bveCVX, you put it in, you can then withdraw it when there are free tokens to withdraw, and then we also have a liquidity pool where you can trade it a lot like CVX CRV or CRV pool, for example. So yeah, that's kind of that. So then, okay, let's go to the holders, right? So I think the first holder, the largest convex holder is like the incumer, right? Somebody that's just like, oh wow, there's like a bunch of money here, right? Like I'm a game theorist, I'm into this, and I can see that like I just want to maximize the value of my convex, right? Like this is a good token, I'm into it. These are the people that are probably taking a bunch of time to think about like, do I delegate to Vodium because I'm big enough and there's going to be like, it's worth the gas to trade, or do I try to like figure out the right way to like pick a certain, thing to vote on every week so I can make the most money? But they're really just concerned with like, how much money can I make?
Hey, can you hang on and just explain the income angle? Like someone who's buying CVX with the goal of making income, where does that income or income come from?
So this is the home of the incumer, right? Llama.Air Force. It's a really well put together site. So this percentage here, the 60% APR right now, which is higher than last week, but I think that's because Convex has held up better than most other stuff. Anyway, this ROI comes from a few sources, right? First of all, there's about a 5% return just for locking Convex, right? Then the second source of income is these like voting bribes. So every voting round, right? Like you can go on this voting protocol and protocols can place bribes for you to vote on their stuff, right? And it seems like there's like 10-ish million in bribes every 2 weeks, right? Which then get split between everybody who votes for them. And then Vodium has a way to delegate your votes to them such that they will vote evenly across in order to kind of extract the maximum yield. And they recently, actually Llama Air Force themselves recently built a tool to then claim all of those, sell them, and put those into a compounding CVX CRV. So basically, if you're an incomer, you're sitting here, you're looking at the Llama dashboard every week, you're like, how many bribes are going to come in? And you get like super excited, like every time somebody posts a new bribe. And then you come to this dashboard and you see like all the things that you can vote for and all the tokens you're on. A lot of them are also like stablecoin stakers. So like, for example, I might be like, man, Frax, like Frax is cool. They bribe a lot. I'm going to put all my money in Frax. Then I'm voting. My vote means that there's actually more emissions going to Frax. Plus I'm getting like 51 cents per vote from Frax. Does that answer your question? I think
It does, yeah. I think the headline at the top of that screen, the DeFi Kingmaker. I think if I had to like make a mind map of these people, their votes are determining which of these different DeFi assets are going to have the best liquidity, and they get the best liquidity because they're incentivized to vote for these curve rewards, so people deposit more of their assets in them. So they are the kingmakers, and by doing this, they're getting this stream of income, and it's kind of like a mercenary capital, right? Like they don't necessarily care. It's kind of like a fuck you, pay me kind of
kind
thing,
of.
right?
I mean, they're not mercenary. They're kingmakers, right? They're not. I guess kingmakers kind of are mercenaries, right? I mean, they're convex holders, right? You could call all of convex a tribe of mercenaries. I'm not sure that that's necessarily true, but they're the people that saw this coming. They said, "I want to be a kingmaker," right? They bought and held and locked a lot of convex, and now they can decide who's king. And then they built. Actually, this wasn't built by convex; it was built by their community, right? And then they built a protocol to say, "Well, if you want to be king, pay me," which seems quite sensible, right? Yeah.
That was like one thing I would add is when we talk about convex and like the voting power of convex, the reason why convex is so valuable is because it controls locked curve. So like curve was the initial, like it's the underbelly of this whole thing. You have to have bveCRV to influence which pools receive curve rewards. And then convex came along and they were like, all right, we are going to create a locked CRV token called convex curve, and we're going to put it in a curve pool, and we're going to vote for that curve pool to receive emissions so that our locked version of the curve holds peg with curve better. And then a bunch of people saw that as being super beneficial, started investing in convex, and as convex got bigger, had more vote power, they locked more curve, and then their token CVX now controls, like one CVX controls something like 5 bveCRV or whatever that you can use for max
And
voting.
I think convex controls more than half the CRV. But
Right. Like they are
CRV. They took over CRV, right?
It's like that Palpatine meme. I am the Senate. Like that's convex basically.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because before convex, I mean, the reason convex only happened when convex happened is because it was allowed to, right? Like
they whitelisted it.
Curve wasn't a totally permissionless protocol, so you couldn't really interact with it as a DAO so easily, right? So it was kind of like individuals were voting with and interacting on Curve, and then Yearn made some sort of like a special deal. So Yearn had a way to actually like work with the DAO and do like DAO to DAO things with Curve, and then I think there was one more, Saddle or something, that had that, and then Convex kind of did, but then instead of trying to like close that off, right? Instead of saying like, we're going to use this as competitive advantage to make our vaults better, they said, we're going to just offer this to all of the other DAOs, right, and create like the Battle of Kings, which was a very good move, clearly,
Yeah.
right, because the protocol's been very successful.
Right. I mean, they gamified it, and that has like changed the narrative around Curve over the past year, 6 months.
So, but not every convex holder is like totally fixed on income, right? I think there's a few other convex holders that are interested. One is DAOs, right? And BadgerDAO is one of them. There's a number of DAOs, but like clearly as a DAO, right, you'd rather not be paying these bribes because they're expensive. And so if you have the convex yourself to vote, then you don't have to pay as many bribes. I could talk about that for a while, but I don't need to. It's pretty self-explanatory, right? In our case, another one is loyal badgers, right? So these are people that came in. They were already in our farms. We switched our farms. We moved all of our Bitcoin basically from Curve to Convex in a way that users didn't have to do anything. And so then they started getting these convex emissions, and convex started going up, and they're like, wow, this is a cool idea. We were kind of telling our narrative and explaining why this is important to Badger, why we thought the convex was like going to be a successful protocol, why this was kind of the bet that we were making. And a lot of our users came along with us, right? Which meant that they held all of the convex that they farmed in our protocol, and they kept it there, and it's still there, a lot of it. And they also like maybe bought more and put it in. Right. So these are people that are more maybe aligned with Badger's mission to bring Bitcoin to DeFi. In their minds, it's been a pretty good investment. And certainly like they don't want to be getting nothing while the incomers are getting everything. Right. But they're also not looking every like 2 seconds to see, hey, like is Badger yields better? Is Badger yields better? Right. Maybe at some point, if they feel like they've been very neglected, they'll wander off, or like maybe right now they think, hey, it's time to exit Convex because they're exiting everything. But yeah, I think that's another one. And then the third one that's really interesting is like the giga whales, right? We see that. So we talked about that before. If you're a huge whale and you want to deposit that 1,000 Bitcoin, right, you could actually now deposit like, I think, I don't know, where was the ratio? I think, hang on. So like right now, right, we have, do I have it here? No. Okay, well, by US dollar value, we have got about 10% convex to Bitcoin. So if you were to deposit, let's not do it in Bitcoin because it's complicated dollar-wise, but $100 million in Bitcoin and about $10 million in convex into the system at the same time, right, the yields wouldn't change. So fundamentally, that means that as a giga whale, right, the cost of scaling is now a 10% of your Bitcoin investment in convex, right? Or maybe you bomb the yields first, and then you're like, hey, why did I bomb the yields? And then you read up a little bit, and we're like, hey, you got to put some convex in. But for somebody that's been getting sub few percent yields on Bitcoin for most of time, like that's a real appealing proposition. That might almost even be worth, like, if it were stable for 5 years, with just like paying that 10% for, let alone buying an investment that is fairly bullish in and of itself.
Got it. Okay, so we've talked about the importance for, I guess we talked about the kind of three profiles, right? We've got the loyal Badgers who are in it because they like Bitcoin, the asset. They like Badger. They want to have, they want to kind of put their convex to work in Badger to kind of help the ecosystem. And you've got giga whales who realize that, hey, this is the key to sustainable yield on my Bitcoin. And then you've got the kind of like income oriented people. And I guess we've been thinking a lot about how to sort of sweeten the deal for the incomer, income-oriented people, right? And we have these unlocks coming up, and have started with them, and they're more coming. And recently, we have made some changes to sweeten the deal even further, to add new kind of sources of returns for this locked convex vault. So, Tritium, let's say that you're kind of like an incomer, income-oriented CVX holder. You're in Badger. You're looking at Llama Air Force. You're seeing that the APY displayed there on a given day is higher than the APY on Badger. Maybe you're a little irritated that you were called mercenary on the Badger podcast, and you're feeling a little grumpy. I don't know what's the Badger message to them. By the way, I'm very sorry for saying that, the M word, for the M word. I take it back. Yeah. So what's our message to kind of like
well, okay, so like even today,
that group?
Well, and it's hard, right? Because there's a lot of different messages. I'm not sure. Like last week when we did this podcast, like our number was bigger, but I'm not sure it is anymore. I'm on the wrong. I'm an arbitrum here, Polygon. Hang on here, but it doesn't matter. So you can go look on Llama at 60, on Badger. Actually, maybe I've got it here. Badger right now it is 51. So yeah, so you can go and look and say, okay, like Badger's paying 9% less. I think historically speaking, we have paid less. And I think for the incomers, like that's not desirable. Right now, we're making a lot of changes, which we'll talk about later in this podcast, in order to really try to make sure that bveCVX actually is competitive with Vodium, at least most of the time, right? And it's a little bit tricky because like yields are calculated very differently, right? Like our yields are based on like the last 7 days of average, and then like again over the weekend, all of the prices shifted by 40%, and based on like the averages and how long you're taking prices on, right? Like these numbers shift. But if the Badger yield is always less than the Vodium yield, right? Then dear incomer, you're clearly not getting a very good deal. And we've heard that and we're aware of that. So and again, we'll go through it a little later, but we're working really hard to make sure that bveCVX does yield. And I think right now it is. And so I guess what I would say to you is like, look at this graph, right? Like you could pull out tomorrow, or I guess you can't pull out tomorrow. You could pull out on Friday, right? You could also pull out the next Friday, unless you've got a lot of CVX, you could probably pull out for the next 2 Fridays. So if you're an incomer and you've taken the hour to listen to this podcast, then you're probably still kind of interested in Badger. And I guess what I would say is like, hang out, watch what happens, like, watch how the next few votes go and how Badger does this, right? And then you can you've got a few weeks now, like for the first time ever, bveCVX really is pretty liquid for the next 4 or 5 weeks.
I mean, on top of that, I think I'd add right now the market is the most uncertain it's been in the past 6 months. So it's a great time to have a more liquid version of locked convex where you're still having the upside of more than whatever the 6% yield that you get in convex curve on convex, and then whatever you get voting over the next 12 weeks or 16 weeks of your lock, you can realize 3 weeks of that, 1 week of that, 3 days of that, and get out.
Yep, that's a really good point, right? So, yeah, that's I don't know, not more to say about it. That is a good point, right? Like that, right now, like you could, you've at least got a few weeks to get those yields and see how the market goes. And so, particularly if you're in bveCVX, to me, it seems I agree with Cookies, like to pull all of your semi-liquid CVX that's yielding, we say now as well, or very close to as well as VLCVX, right? To pull that all out of bveCVX right now and lock it for 16 weeks. Like, yeah, maybe it makes sense to watch the market for another week or two.
Yeah, and that was a feature that we hadn't really talked. We talked about it, but we hadn't kind of used it as like our number one selling point, right, for this vault. It used to be just kind of like the vault, right? So now we have the pool on curve where you can sell your locked convex, and it is
it's not
substantially more liquid.
That's not super genuine entirely, right? Because the reality is there's only like 50,000 tokens in LP right now. So for a very small holder, right, there's always some liquidity, and at least for the next weeks where like there's tokens unlocking, right, like that will always be at peg. But until we figure out how to get a lot more liquidity in the pool, the reality is that most of the liquidity right now is coming from this unlocking, right? And that really, unless we figure out how to get a lot more liquidity in the pool, like after this like March 10th, right? Like there's a while before there's going to be like a lot of liquidity, right? Unless we figure out how to change our incentives, and we've got some thoughts there, right? I don't think that's at the top of our mind right now because we have liquidity for the next month or so, but yeah, it is worth, let's be honest here.
All right, so we've talked about the players in the game, what they're after, and kind of like what our strategy is to kind of put the pieces together. But now I want to talk a little bit about ibBTC, right? So like several months ago, Badger made the decision to kind of go all in on ibBTC and to stop putting Badger emissions on many other pools in our DApps in our DApp, and to go in on incentivizing ibBTC liquidity and to voting to support ibBTC in this Curve and Convex ecosystem. So, what is the current state of how that's going? Earlier at the top, we talked about our goal is to kind of grow ibBTC market cap and these exclusive yields that come through ibBTC. So I wanted to start a little bit on that picture and sketch out how that's going and how the ibBTC machine fits in with the Convex machine.
Sure. So again, going back to this plot of deposits here, right? You can see that when the great whale migration happened on around the beginning of November, right? They had a whole lot of AUM somewhere, and it was basically they had to like balance their AUM over kind of like all of our sets, right? In order to first of all like capture the most yield, but second of all, like a lot of these sets, they put in enough money that even though they didn't have that much boost, they were actually capturing like a pretty good chunk of the Badger yields, right? So in order to like farm Badger, we had like 14 different Bitcoin pools, then yields were shifting around, and it was kind of like you had to chase them all, right? And the idea of ibBTC, which had actually launched long before this, but we hadn't really we didn't have the curve thing working yet, was like the one source of yield in Bitcoin. So what we kind of did when we got this curve pool up is we said, okay, like we don't, we really want, we need ibBTC to be big, right? So that it can have a fairly high amount of whatever underlying curve pools are in it. And we need to have pretty high pool capture, right? We need most of the people that are in ibBTC to be in Badger, right? Because then everything flows back through our system and like our flywheel works, right? And otherwise we're just like spending a bunch of money to kind of get these votes, emitting a bunch of Badger, going through all this work to get these votes, and then we're voting, and then like somebody else is coming and
Can I stop you right there? Can we just take a step back and explain what is ibBTC as a form of tokenized Bitcoin and how it's different than something like a wBTC or RenBTC?
Sure, Cookies, you want to take that one?
Yeah. So basically, RenBTC, right, is you bridge Bitcoin from the Bitcoin blockchain via Ren dark nodes over to the Ethereum blockchain or whichever blockchain you want to go to. And that all one RenBTC represents is one Bitcoin on the Bitcoin blockchain. So you can, go back the same way you came across the Ren bridge, you can go back to the Bitcoin bridge and you're going to get the, number of Ren Bitcoin that you had in Bitcoin minus the small fee you have to pay the dark nodes. The difference with ibBTC, wBTC is the same way, except it's a centralized custodian. The difference with ibBTC is it is comprised of yield-bearing assets. So the only way that you can create a new ibBTC is by depositing in Badger's Ren wBTC convex set. So that's, you're adding liquidity to the Ren BTC wBTC pool on Curve, and you're taking that Curve LP token and you're depositing it in a Badger smart contract. Then you take the vault token you get back from that deposit and you can mint one ibBTC with that vault token. Over time, theoretically, that vault token earns interest, grows in its relationship with the underlying Bitcoin over time. And, if I deposit today and that vault's earning 10% interest, this isn't 100% true right now because of how we have to manage the underlying yield, but theoretically, it earns 10% interest over a year. I deposit one Bitcoin in there, mint one ibBTC. A year from now, my one ibBTC is going to be worth 1.1 Bitcoin that I can, redeem and then withdraw from the Curve liquidity pool, and I'll have back, 1.1 Ren Bitcoin or wBTC minus the withdrawal fees or redeem fees or whatever we're charging on ibBTC. So that's how it's different. It's an interest-bearing inherently form of Bitcoin. There's caveats with that because it only bears interest if the actual vault token increases its price per full share over time. And right now we're not doing that because we don't have the yield retention that Jonto posted along BIP about a couple months ago. implemented yet, but that contract is still collecting rewards from that vault position because, as Tritium mentioned earlier, all of Badger's vaults emit auto compounding yield tokens, so in the form of bveCVX and bCVX CRV.
Yeah, I mean, I think more than the yield retention, right? Like the issue right now is that if you're increasing the price per share of ibBTC, and it's in a curve pool,
Right. Yeah.
then you're going to lose like half your yields. Or I think right now there might be like a problem with the rebasing wrapper in the pool, so maybe more. But like you're not going to see all those yields, right? They get arbed away. And so in a world where ibBTC has lots of utility, right, then that's fine because only a little of it is sitting on curve and, you know, it's all over the place and cool. But like, and right now the focus is really, or has been, on bootstrapping it, right? We just need to get it big enough that there is enough of it to be everywhere, that it can be ubiquitous, right? And so that right now has been focused on using our convex and using our influence to really grow a curve pool. And then in that sense, like, it doesn't really make sense to have the ibBTC yields actually be increasing the price per share of ibBTC because it's less advantageous to any of the users that are using it for basically the primary utility that it has, right? I think there's a maybe like a few hundred or maybe less ibBTC on like Solana and Polygon and on some other chains, but for the most part, it's all in the curve pool.
So talk a little bit about the yield retention goal of ibBTC. So right now, ibBTC is a curve LP token of the REN pool, which is the REN BTC WBTC curve pool that's deposited into Badger, right? And in that smart contract, it is accruing curve and convex tokens, right? What happens to them now, and what is going to happen when the yield retention turns on?
Okay, well, so well, I don't the yield. So the yield retention that originally was proposed was about the fact that like there were multiple vaults with Bitcoin yields, right? And that then we could like farm those and redirect some yields. But to a certain extent, there are no vaults with Bitcoin yields anymore unless we vote for them. So to a certain extent, like that doesn't really make us a lot of sense. But let's just kind of take a minute and think about ibBTC. So like for a long time, ibBTC was auto compounding 20% based on our partner first policy, right? And the rest of the ibBTC was kind of just like building up to be claimed, or the rest of the yields, which were in bveCVX and bCVX CRV, were just kind of like queuing up to be claimed by ibBTC, but like we couldn't really sell them because it was against our policy and they weren't being auto compounded in, right? When we launched the curve pool, that was, at least for the first little while, still the case. And again, the situation was that we were shifting all of our yields from REN. It's a little bit tricky being the only person that creates the yields, right? When you're trying to then manage an interest-bearing instrument, because basically we knew that when we shifted 100% of our vote to ibBTC, there wouldn't be any yields anywhere else at all to retain, right? So we didn't even worry about it, right? We just kind of said, okay, like we're bootstrapping. I think if you remember, there were comms. Let me go back to this history, right? This is here on like November 16th, and we launched this whole bootstrapping thing, and we just shifted everything, all the Badger, everything to ibBTC, and the whole point was like, we just need this to get big, right? The reason we needed it to get big has to do with pool capture. So if I think now is probably a good time to think about this, right? So again, Badger votes for yields on something, right? Then we own a certain amount of that set or of that pool is in our system. And so whatever amount of that pool is in our system, we claim the rewards, right? We deposit the CVX or buy bveCVX with it, right? The CVX goes into our bveCVX. The CVX CRV goes into our bveCVX CRV, where it's like working in our system and we're collecting some fees, and that's all going good, right? And so all of those tokens flow back through the system, right? If the pool capture gets too low, then like it doesn't work anymore. So if you look here, again, like on this plot, like this is kind of the history of the last time, right? So when we first kind of launched ibBTC, we said high capture and cool. Like everybody just was like into Badger ibBTC. We were emitting 50% of the Badger and flat Badger, which again, kind of going back to the boost thing we were talking about at the beginning, meant that for like most people, Badger yielded better, right? For the rent seekers, even then, like the yields on Badger were close to or more than our fees, and it was attractive for everyone, right? So people started depositing in Badger, right? Then, unfortunately, like we had this exploit, right, which you can see right here. It happened on the 2nd of December. And then we had about 2 weeks where our protocol, like our contracts were locked. So it wasn't possible to deposit, right? And during that time, what happened was people kept depositing in the ibBTC vault, right? But they couldn't deposit in Badger. And then by the time they could deposit in Badger, right, all of the flat Badger was gone, and there wasn't really, it was just kind of, it yielded less. And if you were a rent seeker, there was really no reason to do it. So as we kind of came into the beginning of the year, it was, like ibBTC on Badger wasn't really competitive. And we only had about like 20%, 25% pool capture, right? Which meant that we were taking all of our resources and putting them into voting for the CVX and CRV, of which only 25% of it was coming back to our users. And so that was kind of when we started to say, okay, we need to like rethink yield retention, right? And like this old way of thinking about it doesn't work because there are no other yields to retain, right? But at the same time, as you see here, like right around the 2nd of January, right, the yields on REN, the yields that ibBTC had on REN, right, crossed the yields of ibBTC itself, or the pool capture. So what that meant is that there was more REN as a percentage of the pool. There was a higher percentage of the REN curve pool in ibBTC than there was of the ibBTC pool in Badger, right? And so what that actually meant is that for us to vote for REN, right, was more beneficial to our users, right? And then again, we had this ibBTC, all the tokens are flowing into ibBTC. The problem is we didn't know what to do with them. But then it became clear, well, why don't we just take all those tokens and immediately just re-emit them to the LP and the curve pools? So fundamentally, what that's allowed us to do, right, is to stack the two yields, right? So that when you're on Badger, you're getting the ibBTC yields minus the 20% fees, right? Plus your share of the 37% of the REN yields, right? Minus our performance fees. And that then allows us to create exclusive yields, right? Which are higher than convex. So right now, I think if you go on Badger, where I'm still in Polygon, I don't know, maybe somebody else have for a minute. I'll figure out how to do this demo.
While you're pulling that up, so we're going to take a few minutes to talk about the elusive quest for exclusive yields and where this comes from, right? So from my understanding, the problem is this. So Badger is voting using its convex vote weight for yields that are put out by curve and convex, right? And if you're taking your assets and depositing them into convex, you can get something like, I don't know, 12 or 15 or 17%, right? Then if you go ahead and deposit them on Badger, Badger's taking a fee out of that. And so people were kind of saying, why should I deposit on Badger? Like the upside of getting the rewards auto compounded from Badger is not worth this fee cut. And so basically Badger was not getting any benefit from those yields that it was creating, which makes the flywheel spin slower, right? So then there is this idea of creating exclusive yields that are only available on Badger. And this has to do with a quirk of how these pools come together, right? So, and how ibBTC has these underlying yields and where they intersect with the different pools. So while you're getting that pulled up,
I think I'm ready.
Can you?
I can look it up.
Yeah.
So you want me? Okay. So like right now, right, and this was not the case before. Right now, if I go on Badger, right, I can see that on the ibBTC, and again, this is my DAO signer wallet, right? Like I don't know where these came from. I held some tokens for a minute, but I have no boost, and I'm getting 8% yield. If I go to convex, right? Then there are two sets in Bitcoin that we're voting on yields on, which are the two sets where there are yields, right? One is REN, and we can see here that REN's got about a 3.46% yield, right? And then the other one is ibBTC, and we can see that ibBTC has a 5.65% yield. So at the moment, it's looking pretty good, right? Like I can go here, and if I'm seeking rent, it's like okay, I can either get 5% or 3%, or I can go over to Badger and get 8%, right? 2 weeks ago, you wouldn't have, without this real yield redirection, right? This yield, the Badger yield on ibBTC, right, would have been like 20% less than the 5.65%, right? So I don't know, my mental math.
And that's the Badger performance fee coming
And
in.
that's minus their performance fees, right? So again, when, at the beginning of the year, if you were to go and you looked on Badger and you looked on Convex, you would see the ibBTC pool that was entirely supported by Badger's influence, and you would see a number there. And then you go to Badger and you would see a smaller number there unless you had sufficient boost, which again, any large whale can't really have. And then it's kind of like, well, why would I use Badger, right? That's fair. And again, like we can't just keep emitting tons and tons of Badger.
So here's the part that it took me a while to understand, right? So if you imagine, uh, curve and convex are kind of the sun, and they're emitting out these rays of yield. It's kind of like a conservation of energy, right? Like if the yield in the system is coming from curve and convex, and Badger is taking a fee on that, how is it possible to get more in than is coming out on these individual pools? So where does this exclusive yield come from if the ultimate source is curve and convex?
Okay, so again, when we vote on one pool, right? Like there's two components of ibBTC yields. There's the yields on ibBTC LP itself, right? That's this 5.65% right now, right? That's just, you put it in the pool, you can get that money, right? Then remember that as you were saying, or as Cookies was saying, right, that ibBTC is actually made up of REN BTC or REN curve, right? So that means that any of the REN curve that ibBTC owns is also earning yields, right? And so right now, right, looking at pool capture, 37% of all of the ibBTC, or sorry, of 36% of all of the REN curve is actually deposited into ibBTC, which means that sometimes like at a DAO level, it makes less sense to think about yields. But if you go back to thinking about like that 146 that we were generating per vote, right? That means that like a third of that, so maybe about like 50 cents, is actually flowing into ibBTC per vote, right? So basically now we can vote for both REN and ibBTC, right? That whole 5% becomes available to ibBTC, like that's Badger yields, right? Plus we get this extra 50 cents a vote, right? Which is again is 33% of the 146 that we saw here on Llama, right? So 146, 36% of that, 50 cents, give or take, good enough, right? So then plus. So now you're basically getting the 146 for that we paid into the pool. Sorry, now I'm crossing numbers again. But the point is, there's more yields, right? Another way to look at this is that if ibBTC right now, so the ibBTC LP right now is made up of 58% ibBTC, right? That means that kind of like 58% of that 50 cents in a sense, or 58% of that 3.6% is additional yield that we can add on to ibBTC. And I would imagine if you took like, I'm not going to do the math right now, but if you took 58% of the REN yields, right, minus the, so of 3.45 minus the 20% fees and added it to the ibBTC yield minus fees, you would get something that was like fairly close to 8%, because that's fundamentally what's happening. We could do it if you want, but
Yep.
maybe not on a podcast.
No, I mean, I think it's a cool thing because like it shows this is like one of those things that can only really happen in DeFi, right? Because these pools are just tokens that can be made into other kind of like built on top of one another, right? So like the way I've kind of visualized it is like you imagine a Venn diagram, right? And so like there's two circles on the Venn diagram. There's the Ren, and then there's the ibBTC LP, right? And both of those have their own emissions. And because the ibBTC is consists of a chunk of Ren, there is a part of that Venn diagram that overlaps, right? And so that's getting the additive emissions from both pools, and that's where this exclusive yield comes from, right? It's because these two pools can intersect, and there's this portion of the pool that's intersecting, and so you get both of the yields stacked on top of each other.
Exactly. And I think like one of the cool things you said is this can only happen in DeFi. And I think that the whole way this has played out has been the most DeFi way ever, where we are having conversations in our Discord with users who are asking, why can I get a better yield base with no boost on Convex than I can on Badger? And that required us to take a look at all the pool capture stuff that Tritium talked about and what we were doing with, the focus on bootstrapping at first. And if you look at it, on the exploit threw a huge wrench in things as far as people were physically unable to deposit in Badger. And I've been really curious how those 2 weeks would have played out if people could have deposited in Badger at that point, if as many people would have deposited in Convex, and what it would look like. Regardless, what it looked like at the end of those 2 weeks was the pool capture on ibBTC in Badger. So the amount of that Convex LP token held by Badger was, significantly lower than the amount that was held just in Convex. But at the same time, because we focus so heavily on bootstrapping ibBTC, and most people who don't know what Badger is didn't have ibBTC, in order to get that LP token, you didn't have to deposit ibBTC because Curve allows you to deposit single assets into the meta pools. So you could have deposited ibBTC ibBTC, RemBTC, WBTC, or SBTC to get that token. And what a lot of people did was they deposited just WBTC or RemBTC or SBTC, which led to an imbalance in the pool, which then led to, like, if you look at Badger over the past 2 months, there have been a ton of arbitrage bots that have been depositing and minting ibBTC with Ren and WBTC, and then like immediately selling that for profit, which led to a higher pool capture of the Ren WBTC, convex token, which then made that overlap that you were talking about, Wasabi, with the Venn diagram larger and made it make more sense for Badger to vote for the Ren pool as well as the ibBTC pool, and enabled Badger to deliver that exclusive yield that, we've talked about.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really, and I think that's a great way to, again, I always think of ibBTC as like the Bitcoin whale, right? So like, if you were, I don't know, like if you were some holder with like 5,000 Bitcoin, right, or $500 million in Bitcoin, you could go buy $50 million in CVX, and you could pick whatever pool you wanted, really. You could put all your Bitcoin in it. You could vote for it. You could get all the curve and convex, and you could do the same thing Badger is doing, right? But the reality is that nobody that has that much Bitcoin actually wants to, like, no VC that has that much Bitcoin like actually really wants to deal with that, right? Like, they're portfolio managers and they're busy doing other stuff, and like no small holder ever has a chance of that. And to me, like, Badger's always been this like fair launch DAO that's about like everybody coming together and creating the opportunity for everyone that like only the whale could have, right? And so I think that like we've gotten there with ibBTC. Like we're finally at the point where we had to bootstrap it. We had to get to the point where it was, the third largest Bitcoin or the fourth largest like Bitcoin out, or wrap Bitcoin on ETH. And we had to get to the point where we had the high capture and Ren, right, where ibBTC had enough of a pool that it could get the benefits of voting on it and could start to make these plays. But like now we're kind of at the point where we are that Bitcoin whale, right? And we're working as a community and in public and, with everybody that wants to be involved to figure out like the best way forward to make everybody money.
Okay, so To our listeners who are still here with us, I know this has been kind of a technical discussion, so I want to move us into our kind of dessert segment of the recording and get some alpha from Cookies and Tritium and hear some stuff they're thinking about in the market. Because since the first time we recorded this, I don't know, we're down quite a bit, and I don't know exactly how much because I'm not opening my Zapper or any financial accounts right now. But before we do that, I just have one more question. So we talked about the exclusive yield and pool capture model. So what do you think? Do you think this is going to be the same kind of voting structure we're going forward, or how does this gonna? How sustainable is this? Is there just gonna have to be a kind of like twice every 2 weeks reevaluation of this based on what the pool capture is looking like, or how does this turn into kind of like a model or a system for making these decisions going forward?
Yeah, so Poe and I are working on that, right? And if you look right now, if you think about everything we've talked about, right, we're kind of looking at like a few outputs, right? We're looking at like, or a few inputs, I guess, right? Which is like pool capture, which is based on like how much is in the pool and how much we hold, right? And so there's some internal factors about our size, and then like, and then the value of bribing and of convex on llama, right? And so the goal is to, and basically what we're doing, and like there's this article that I hope to get out soon. It's long and it takes you through all of the math and helps you kind of understand how to do that. But the goal is to like figure out the secret formula, right? And to make that clear. The problem is that like convex votes are streamed. So it takes about a week. It actually took like 2 weeks almost before like the all of the things that we voted for really came to fruition. So that's the first thing, is that things are delayed enough that I think we've kind of learned that you, unless like something really drastic or unexpected happens, you probably want to vote the same way at least twice in order to like see what happened. Right. And then actually right now, like what we've been doing, if you go to the Badger Discord, there's a channel called bveCVX Voting Bribing. And we're having very, very, very open and public conversations with the community about like what we're doing and why, and we're collecting feedback and thinking about it. I think the goal is over the next month to make this a lot more clear, right? To hopefully get this article out that's going to explain everything in this podcast in like kind of a more coherent and written way that hopefully is maybe a little bit more boring but easier to like follow. Um, and and then eventually we're working towards, what I'd like to do. So you've seen all these DAO Watch dashboards, right? We don't have the Vodium data here, but can my eventual goal is a dashboard that just shows all of the inputs and then tells us how we're going to vote, right? And then an article that explains like how that thinking is, so that like real time we're just pulling all of the information and we're saying, we figured out the optimal way to balance things, and we're and we vote like that, right? I think in the end, well, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I think we
I'm
really have to
interested to
wait
hear.
and see.
So Cookies, you're a Python guy, right? So I'm sure you've made a bot or two in your day. Like, does this problem strike you as the kind of thing that could be reduced to just like a bot that takes in these numbers and puts out an answer, or does there always have to be some kind of like politicking and kind of like prognostication in here?
That's what I was gonna say. I honestly think it ends up being both, just because like DeFi is so fluid. Where I think we're going to have a model at some point that, like, yes, it's Python or whatever, and it's incorporating the pool capture and convex price and bribe price and all of that jazz. And it's like, all right, this is the optimal way for Badger to vote to support its customers and collect yields.
And then a month later, everything changes.
Exactly. Like that's the other thing. Like I think the really cool thing about DeFi and Badger, and we've harped on earlier in the podcast, and it's why I wanted to work here and work for the DAO and be a DAO member, is because it's so community driven. DeFi changes so quickly. You have to take input from as many people as you can, and there are experts that like know things that you don't and come in and share really great ideas and whatever. And I think Badger's willing to do that, and I think that's why we were able to change our voting strategy to deliver these exclusive yields this past round, and we're going to do it this next round. Also, at the same time, we were talking earlier today, so not even like we're just talking about the convex ecosystem right now. Badger, what we want to do is we want to provide the best place to put your Bitcoin in DeFi in a non-custodial way where you control, ownership of your assets and you're earning interest, and like that's where we want to be. There are new protocols that are coming out that, Wasabi Tritium we were talking about right before recording, the VE33 or like whatever comes out. Maybe there's like a 6.6 thing that comes out in the next year. Like I have no idea, but like there's going to be something that totally shakes everything up. And like we have to be in a position where like we are thinking about that and able to adapt. So I think it's going to be a little bit of both model and community and just like elbow grease, honestly. Like sometimes you just got to throw darts at the wall and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I've just said is, like Spada's dream of ibBTC has always been, like it's $5 billion, right? It's very, very large. And so the bootstrapping strategy was about just getting it big, right? And we got it as big as we could get it before our pool capture went to crap, and like then it wasn't competitive anymore, right? Like now we're kind of trying to figure out this pool capture thing, right? So like how do we create these exclusive yields and like how do we work this out, right? But that's not, like we're not in this game to be kind of like balancing between two pools, right? The goal is that ibBTC should be multi-chain and it should be in a lot of places, and there should be lots of utility for it, which should be a large part of its value. And then it should eventually have like some underlying return, which wouldn't need to be that large because there's all the utility. So I think there's two things happening in parallel. Like one is that we need to get it bigger, and we're going through various stages, starting with bootstrapping, right, and now kind of looking at pool capture optimization, and then like once we figured that out and we're looking at this and like all of these numbers are green and everything's looking good and the thing's trending up, right, then kind of the question is like what's next, and my guess is that will involve more utility for ibBTC, which will mean that the yields, instead of being redirected to the curve pool, are going to actually have to go into ibBTC like it was originally intended, right? And then then this whole thing doesn't work anymore, right? Then we need to find like new sources of exclusive yields or a new reason for ibBTC to continue to grow. So I think you're going to see a lot of changes in progress with ibBTC as it grows up.
All right. Well, cool. Well, so with that, why don't we move into our kind of fun dessert segment and just get some alpha, get some of your thoughts. I'm curious if you're making any new moves in the market now. It's been crazy the last couple days, I guess, since Friday. So I don't know, Cookies, you got any alpha for us? It could be financial, it could be baking tips, whatever you got.
Yeah. And so on the original recording of the podcast, I gave my alpha on my grandma's cookie recipe. However, times have changed since then, and there are larger things going on in my life right now than grandma's cookie recipe. So my first piece of non-crypto alpha is going to be: don't give Patrick Mahomes the ball with 13 seconds left when he needs a field goal, because he's going to get the field goal. So that's my first piece of alpha. Sorry for all of the Badger Bills fans out there. Diehard Chiefs guys, you've got a great one in Josh Allen, but he's not as good as Mahomes. My second piece of crypto alpha, I guess, would be put some aside for your taxes, because the bear market may be coming. I don't know. I'm not a great trader, but like you are going to have to pay income taxes in the next however many months. So make sure you have some aside there. And then a little bit of Badger alpha. I mentioned this. This was my piece before. The cross bridge protocol by UMA just adopted Badger for bridging from Arbitrum instantaneously instead of having to wait the 7 days via the Arbitrum bridge. And you can provide liquidity with your Badger. And it was earning like 20-40% APR. I don't know what it's down to now. I'm sure it's lower because it's been out for a couple of days now. But that's going to be added to Badger Boost. So you'll be able to pool your Badger in the a cross pool, and it'll still count towards your boost at some point in the near future. So definitely look into that. Stay tuned for the rewards team updates on when that's added to boost and everything along those lines.
So I was looking at that after you mentioned it the other day, and I was looking at the APY. So where does that come from? Like, is that just a portion of like how much Badger is being bridged? You're getting some as a fee, so it will go up and down based on like how much is being moved, or is it like a governance token, or what does it come from?
I'm pretty sure it's just off of fees right now, but I think the other alpha there, I read this on Twitter from like, I don't know if it was DCF God or someone, but I think someone had a spaces saying that Across may be launching a token soon. So that's not out yet. Right now, the APY is just from fees from, I guess, the bridge volume, but they may be launching a token. So I'm sure that providing liquidity to their bridge would, like, I would assume that would count towards airdrop qualification or whatever if they do end up doing it that way. It's like 100% community owned too. So
How do you 100% community own something that doesn't have a token?
I think it was built by like just
By UMA.
these devs built it and then they just turned it over to the community. And they're like, hey, do what you want to do with this.
Okay. So it sounds like we need some governance. But it
yeah,
sounds like
exactly. Yeah.
yeah, cool.
Tritium, what do you got for us?
I don't know. I get wrecked when I suck at trading, right? Like I can tell you what I think a good idea is, but like I almost always end up like buying it at the wrong time or whatever. Like there's, I'm fairly invested in Redacted, which has now been extremely wrecked butterfly, right? And based on how wrecked it is, I would now say that maybe that looks like a good investment, but I'm saying that having lost a substantial amount of mine, so I wouldn't necessarily listen to me.
Are you a crypto value investor now?
Yeah, well, I'm just, I don't have any cash. I'm not selling, right? I'm a hodler right now and waiting for better times. But I think, where I've actually made most of my money in the last month or two is on these like 1% Uniswap V3 pools, right? So when like I made a ton on Butterfly, but like when a new token launches, there doesn't tend to be that much of it in circulation, right? When it gets like widely airdropped, it's different. But like particularly like when there's a new token and it's like slowly being released, right? There's not a lot of it, and there tends to be a ton of volume. And it used to be that the only liquidity was like protocol incentivized liquidity, right? So like Badger had the emissions and that the old like style LP where you got into the Uniswap V2 LP and you stake somewhere and you got a bunch of rewards. But now there's all these like wonderful Uniswap V3 pools, right? So you can basically go in this pool and you take, you can pick any range. You can go pretty narrow band, and you can LP in that range, but for 1% fees, right? And so very often, like I've just looked at stuff and you look at the candles and you're like, something's bumping up and bouncing up and down by like 20%. And even just like picking a range in there, right? Every time the price goes through that range from the bottom to the top, you're going to get 1%, right? Maybe potentially more if it bounces around in that range. But if you just thought about the price going up 10%, down 10%, up 10%, down 10%, and you were in like a very narrow 2% range in the middle of that, right? You'd get your 1% every time you cross that range. And I play with it a little bit. It works out really well. I think on ETH, it can be pretty expensive with gas because, first of all, like the IL can be pretty extreme, right? It's not something to throw a lot of money at. And you start with like all of one token and then you end up with all of another token. And if you want to get back in, you have to swap again. So like you really have to like realize that impermanent loss pretty quickly. But the rewards are just phenomenal if you get it right. So I would say gas is expensive. There's also Uniswap V3 on Polygon. And I think there's new tokens launching there from time to time. So maybe that's like a good time to play around with it. But yeah, new tokens, token launch. First thing you do, go look at the V3 pool. If you see that there's like 1 million in liquidity and like 50 million in volume, like that's a moneymaker.
So is that what you look at? You look at the liquidity to volume ratio?
Yeah, basically, right? Because if there's very low liquidity and very high volume, and maybe the volatility and whether I think it's at all predictable or like kind of, so a good Uniswap V3 pool, you don't want to have to be moving. You're better off something that like isn't going really quickly up or really quickly down, but it's more just like bouncing around all over the place. So that's kind of what I look for is like, first of all, that there's not like a strong, fast trend, right? That's going to just break me out of the range and like I'm going to just keep getting wrecked with IL. And second of all, like, yeah, liquidity to volume, right? How quickly, how many times am I going to turn this over? Because if you think about it, right, again, you're also concentrating it. But even, if you're getting a 50-to-1 ratio, that means that like the volume's getting turned over 50 times a day and you're making 1%, that's 50% a day, right? I mean, in that. It's pretty ridiculous.
Cookies, do you play with V3?
No, I don't. But I was thinking during what you're talking about trading. I think I read a tweet somewhere that was like comparing actively managed V3 positions versus like just holding a single NFT. And I think the single NFT, they're basically showing that you actually are less profitable doing the actively managed positions than the single ones. So it sounds like you're onto something.
Yeah, it depends. It's like the most AP Deegan thing to do in the world, right? And I suck at trading enough. So like, I said that I sucked at trading, and I said that I'm making a lot of money doing something that's actually a very complex trading activity, right? But somehow for me, that must mean something, right? That means that I'm like shooting in the dark, and I usually miss, and I'm somehow like cashing in. If you know what you're doing, you could probably make a lot of money.
Yeah, I don't see why Uniswap, I mean, they're all about just like Wild West, put any asset in there. Like they should let you choose your fee they should let you just set a custom fee pool.
Oh, you mean like other than I think you've got a choice between 0.5, 3, and 1.
Right, but why isn't there like a 2%? I mean,
Know.
how many more things?
I,
Just seems like you are getting, with 1% for these like very new coins, you are getting well compensated
yeah,
for
well,
liquidity, I think. But
it has a little bit to do with the routing, right, and how to trade. Because the thing is, like, a lot of times you'll see a pool. There's like a 1% pool. That's the other thing to look at. Is there also, is there also a 0.3% pool, right? Because if you think about it, there's a 0.3% pool. The small trades happen there, but when there's a fast price movement and you move more than like far enough up to make the fee worth happening, right? Then that pool kicks into effect. So yeah, they're smart at Uniswap. I imagine that it's well thought out. And maybe they will add more. But yeah, I don't know. And I guess going back to cookies, the other thing about this protocol managed like V3, right, or some sort of automation, is that like the risk appetite is different there, right? So if I put in all my money into a automated V3 thing, and then like it gets totally wrecked in IL, and either I come back like in 2 days and there's half of my money, or I only have like one token that's worth a lot less, right? Like I'm gonna be pretty pissed off. Whereas like if I'm like aping around and I'm kind of like aware of what I'm doing and I'm aware of the risk, and these are risks that I'm taking, right, then like, yeah, that works better. So I don't think that if you're doing this for like a whole bunch of people, at least not the way I'm doing it, right, yeah, I don't think you could do what I'm doing.
all right, well, I'm personally at this very moment looking at my position in one of these 1% pools, and if it works out, I will let everyone know on a later episode, and if it doesn't work out, I will quietly never mention it again. So with that, Tritium Cookies, thank you for re-recording this today. Apologies for the audio issues last time, but let's get this out there and keep spreading the ibBTC good news.
Yeah, and give us your convex. We'll make it worth your while. Come talk to us about it if you have questions. Like, we want your convex. We're very happy to talk to you about how to make you happy. So yeah, come have that conversation with us.
And on top of that, if you have ideas about what you think Badger should be doing with Convex or other opportunities, whatever, hop in the Discord. Like Tritium, Poe, very active in there. Sometimes you'll get a shit post from me. Like we love talking to our community members. This is a community DAO. All of our strategies are go through our Discord. So
all right, well, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.